Hi, everyone that's joining
Hello.
us.
I'm always whenever these start, I'm always like, maybe there'll be like nobody here today.
I
There'll be
always
zero
think that no one
attendees.
can hear me.
No one here. Yeah.
I
We'll
used
just
to
keep
make
talking,
someone tell me in the chat every time. I'm
right?
like, can someone just let me know that you can hear me? Welcome, everyone. As you come in, I'm going to give us a little bit of an introduction. And first up, we want to just know where everyone is at in the curriculum. So it'll just give us a good idea of if we're talking to people that are all in prep, or if we're talking to people who are halfway, or a mix of everything, or people who are launch school curious. So I'm going to launch that poll now, and you can just fill in where you're at. I think we have all of the options up there to give us an idea. If you're not sure what you're signed up for, you're here for an Ask Me Anything with Chris. Chris is the founder of Launch School, so that's what we're doing today. We can talk about a lot of things. We can talk about Launch School, we can talk about programming, we can talk about career development, anything like that. So if you want to just drop questions into the Q&A, I'll also be keeping an eye on the chat. But if you want to drop questions into the Q&A, that's where I'll be pulling most of our questions from for Chris to answer. It looks like most
Yeah, I
people
see
are in the core curriculum. Yeah.
I see a lot of familiar names here. So not everybody, obviously, but a lot of familiar names. I want to say, well, there's a lot of people not even in prep. And it's funny when you said, hey, if you don't know what you're here for, it kind of reminds me like first day of class in college, the professor was always like, this is like introduction to physics. And a third of the people walk out or something.
No, whoops.
like, what are you doing here? Or whatever the class is, right? And it's always hilarious to see that.
Yeah.
But hopefully you're here because you're as Brandy said, I don't think I've heard this term, launch school curious. At least that, right? Or software engineering curious, if not launch school curious. Fellow Torontonian. Is that a word? Torontonian.
Yeah, if you guys want to share where you're from, that's cool. I
Yeah, that's great.
almost called us launchies the other day, but I felt like I should probably run that by you before I give us a term like that.
Yeah, I don't know what we have. There's I've heard of the term launchies for like a different thing. There's a semi-famous like angel investor. And he has a program called Launch, and he calls the participants of that program launchies.
Mm.
Um, so yeah. And then there's like a nonprofit called Launch School out in the East Coast somewhere. And they
Hmm.
call themselves something as well. And I get their emails once in a while. I'll
Okay,
forward it
I'll
to them,
keep
by the way.
workshopping it.
Yeah. We'll just come up with some
Um,
crazy too. Doesn't
all
have to
right, so it
be
looks,
launch.
yeah, launchables. That's hilarious, Carlos.
I love that.
Um,
That's a
I
good one.
think that might stick. So it looks like we're winding up at about 50% in core curriculum, 36% in prep, and a small percentage in not yet in prep. And we have one in Capstone, hello, and one who's finished
Who
core
is
but didn't
that?
do Capstone. Who is
Who's the
it? Identify yourself.
Okay, well, no, you don't have to.
Yeah,
I thought they said it in chat, but yeah. Okay.
cool. Well, should we go ahead and get started, Chris? Do you have anything else you want to share?
No, just happy to see everybody. And yeah, feel free to ask questions. This is for you. So we got some pre-written questions just to seed the conversation, but there's the benefit of a live setting, right? So use the chat room, chat box, use the Q&A feature. And if we don't get to it, you can follow up over email, just hello@launchschool.com or support@launchschool.com. It's actually the same email box behind the scenes. So either one works.
Mm-hmm. I'll drop those in again at the end. So don't worry if something doesn't get answered. So I want to start us out with something that I've been curious about, and then I'll take a peek at the questions while you're answering. But Chris, I want to know, what was your first experience with mastery-based learning?
Yeah, that's such a my answer is probably not going to be very satisfying here because it's not related to software, and because I went to school for programming and learning to program, but not in this way, right? So I know people will say law school seems like a long process, but it took me about 10 years just randomly at work with my own. I had a startup before I did launch school. I had my own startup that, I almost went, well, that's a different topic for a different day, but learned a lot doing that, did a lot of consulting, had a lot of different jobs and careers, and just learned bits and pieces. And this is a structured environment, right? So the where I saw that is actually growing up playing basketball. Um, there, when you grow up playing basketball, I grew up like going to the YMCA. My parents but they were, kind of poor immigrants, worked like 12 hours a day. So I didn't really have them. So I grew up at the YMCA pretty much when I was little, and just got put into like these basketball leagues and camps. And what I noticed is there are always kids our age who are playing with older kids, right? And so why do they get to do that and we don't? Well, they're better, right? They're better is why. And so that's like my first exposure to this. And of course you see it in different places. And martial arts is the most obvious one, right? I never participated in martial arts myself, but I definitely know the concept of like the belts. And you see it in other disciplines like music, where skill is like really, really important. Like for sports, skill is really, really important. It's really important that you play with people roughly around the same skill. I'm at the age now where, like, if somebody goes, "You want to go play basketball?" and it's like, "Hey, are you good?" I can't. I'm gonna be like, "No, obviously not. I'm not that good." But if like I have some neighbors that invited me, and they're like, "Man, you're awesome." I'm like, "No, it's because you've never played, right? Like that's why I grew up playing, but obviously I'm not that good." Like there's people way like average players are way better. But it's just like you never played. That's why, right? So you can see the skill difference in these disciplines that require skill, where skill is really important, right? And so that's where mastery-based learning comes from. And it's very obvious when you've participated in one of these things. That's why a lot of musicians here, it's obvious. It's obvious to them because in the discipline of music, you have to take a mastery-based approach. There's no other way, right? And I think it's confusing because in software, there is another way. You don't have to do it this way, right? There is another way. And because the bar is low, frankly, the bar is relatively speaking low. That's why we have career transitions into this, right? There's no career transitions into like neurosurgeon, right? So because there's a very strict bar. So, but the openness of being a software engineer, I think it's a good thing overall, but it can be a bad thing too, and that it's confusing. Where's the bar? What's the minimum thing I got to do to get a job, right? There is no minimum, right? And there's times are tough now, so now that minimum bar, you're feeling it, right? You're feeling that bar. But years before, when we first started launch school and things were good, there's no bar. And so mastery-based learning to me is an antidote to the hype when times are good, to the depression when times are bad, right? So like you see people, it's been a tough pitch, frankly, about our curriculum. Either way, markets are good, everyone's getting a job. It's a tough pitch. It's a tough pitch. I can go to this or I can read a book and get a job. What I got to go through your curriculum, pay $200 a month, take these crazy assessments? That doesn't seem necessary. Times are bad. I should go get a PhD. I got to get a computer science degree. Right? So it's just like swings in either direction, good or bad. And we've just been the same. So, and I think that's the most logical way, I guess, for me. It's just skills development, one step at a time, one step at a time. There's, no other way around it, good or bad. So for me, it's basketball. Right. I don't know if that was a satisfying answer, but, because I saw that and I felt that.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. It kind of reminds me of a conversation we've had about how people are like, "Oh my gosh, you're so skilled, like you're so talented." And people get that in the arts a lot, in music and basketball. And it's like, well, you haven't seen me throwing these free throws like 100 times in a row just as
I can
practice,
tell you don't play
right?
basketball.
You haven't seen it. Okay, I don't
we
know
don't say
yet.
Throwing free throws.
Okay, yeah, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
it's not talent,
sure.
it's not
for sure.
Gifted. It's these this dedication. Okay, so we have some questions. what do you think about the current market as it is right now for software engineering, and in particular, as it applies to capstone grads?
Yeah, it's tougher than before for sure, right? If we didn't have prior years as a comparison, I don't think I would be like, oh, it's bad or depressing or whatever. It's only that we have prior years as a comparison that we're like, hey, it's slowing down, right? I myself, I graduated into a recession, into that 01, 02 downturn. It was pretty bad. It was a bloodbath. People were getting laid off left and right. It felt like the end of the world. And I feel like in tech, there's always something that makes you feel that way, right? Um, but there's tremendous opportunity here, right? Like when I was starting out, and I've mentioned this many times in various places, in videos and things like that, but it's offshoring. Offshoring was the thing, right? Jobs going to India and China. You got 1 billion people over there. You got 2 billion people over there, right? They're smart too. They can learn programming too. And and by the way, in India, they speak English, right? As like their first language, or not first language, but one of the primary languages, right? And so how are you going to compete with that when someone's willing to work for 1/4, 1/5 your wage, right? Major issue. I'm excited about the podcast recordings that's coming out, and we've been recording them, because we talk about why that is, why that offshoring just it doesn't work the way you think it does. Because ultimately, what we do is about communicating with other humans. Communication is such a nuanced thing. It requires real time, some time zone differences. There's a tremendous cultural aspect to it, right? And there's tremendous trust involved. Good communication requires trust that's built in. It's hard to do that when people are around the world. They don't know each other. They have very little things in common, right? So at the end of the day, at the core, it's about working with other humans, right? It's software engineering is a human-centric discipline. It's a human-centric discipline. So offshoring threat. What's next? Automation. Automation was a huge threat. It still is, right? And AI is on that spectrum of automation, more and more interesting automation, right? And this just depends on how you think about yourself and what do you think you do. Do you solve problems or do you write code? If you write code, the code generation process will be scary. But if you think you solve problems, then it's not. Then you welcome that change. So the market as a whole is down, but I think that's just there's a lot of reasons for this, right? The main reason is the stock prices are going down, right? And so how do these big tech companies make sure their prices stay up? You cut OpEx, right? OpEx, operating expenses. What is the highest OpEx in tech? Salaries, right? So it's kind of funny because they have layoffs and then they have job openings, right? It's like, what is going on? How does that happen? Why do they lay off people when they have job openings? It's very confusing, right? So lots of demand still, lots of tech is still the great lever, right? The great leverage in different domains. You still look to tech and AI and automation to have a competitive advantage in any field now, right? It's still a massive advantage. So I still believe that we are in the middle, if not the beginning stages of the tech revolution, right? Software revolution, software eating everything. These things, the great arc of that is decades and decades. I don't think it will end in our lifetime. So it just depends on where you think that is, right? What is the great transformation, societal transformation that's happening now?
Right.
I think it's
That
technology
brings
driven.
us,
Yeah.
yeah. That brings us to kind of a follow-up question on that one is, have you noticed the skills that employers are looking for to be changing in the past few years, or maybe how you expect them to change the skills that people have?
No, I think it's been very steady. What's changed are the low-hanging jobs are gone, right? So like you read one JavaScript book and you get a job. That's gone. And the reason why that's gone is because as budgets tighten, the first budgets that are cut are sort of these projects that are at the lower end, right? So for example, a marketing department might have a budget to hire a entry-level web developer, pays $50,000 a year to just build like landing sites for the marketing department, right? So when budgets are tight, that budget's cut. When that budget's cut, then that role's gone. So you have a lot of these like very low end roles that are impacted first, right? But if you look at job postings, they're still around. I think there's more competition than before, right? There's more competition than before. So there's stiffer competition. So but what employers are looking for at the core, I don't think that's changed. Like for example, Capstone interviews are not getting more difficult, right? They're the same level of difficulty. It's just like there's more applicants now.
So it's not the skills are changing, it's just the bar is being gradually raised for what it takes.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I created Launch School to create colleagues. That's the bottom line. I mean, there's a quality standard I expect out of people that I can call graduates of Launch School. Not going to change that bar. And that hasn't changed for us from the beginning, right? So like I said, in good times or bad, it's you kind of can always find a reason why like this won't work, Launch School won't work, right? But we've always maintained our quality standard. I think now is just it's not like an option anymore. I wrote that article about what's that called, like avoid the career transition trap, where I talked about the various trajectories of a career, right? I wrote that because times were good and it was confusing as to why you would want to take longer time to learn, right? Now you see, right? Now it's not a choice, right? Now instead of the objection now is not so much like I can read a book or Launch School. It's like there's no jobs, so I better go get a degree or like do something else. Like maybe it's not even worth transitioning to tech anymore, right? So yeah.
Okay, this one is interesting. I'm not sure I've seen this one asked before. Do you have an idea, I'm sure you do, of the spread of technology sectors that core or capstone grads are working in? Are they web developers? Are they working in security, blockchain, game development? What are they working in?
Yeah, so I think we attract a wide variety of backgrounds. So sometimes people will, like, I can't take 100% credit. For example, there's a core grad who is on the core team at Ethereum. That's crazy. I don't know if I can take credit for that, 100% at least, right? He has a computer science degree, right? Worked at Google. So there's a lot of things like that I think it's not like, it's awesome to see people do things later, and it's awesome to have us be part of that story, right? But how much of it was like Launch School, Launch School's training? I think it's non-zero, but it's not 100% either, right? So, but yeah, it runs the gamut. We have people definitely in the Web3 space, in every specialization you can think of. Now more and more ML, AI. Gonna have a podcast recording with somebody in the ML space, talk about his journey, right? How he got there, right? So once you know fundamentals, I think it's a little confusing, right? Because a lot of people ask about like, what do we have to core? It's confusing when a lot of doors open too, right? When no doors are open, it's confusing. When a lot of doors are open, it's also confusing. It's like, how do I navigate these doors? And even Capstone, we're like, okay, we're gonna go down this one door for now, right? We're gonna go down this one door for now. We're gonna close these other doors. But as you get into your career, you can navigate whatever direction you want, right? So yeah, all of them. But I would say immediately after, it's closer to web engineering is probably how I describe it. Infrastructure, understanding production deployment, not just like coding. If you just finish core and get a job, it's more like coding all day, right? Just coding, generating code. That's more code generation, feature building. If you finish Capstone, it's that plus production concerns, infrastructure, things like that.
Someone else asked, and I think it's kind of a similar idea, but a bit more specific of, do you see many core Capstone grads go into like dev adjacent roles, like technical writing or like developer advocacy or anything like that?
Historically, no. And I would say those roles that you described are like, I would say too adjacent even now. But we have started to ask people to look a little bit wider, but not as wide as technical writing. I think that's too wide. But there's a spectrum, right? There's a spectrum of software engineering adjacent roles. For example, a solutions engineer is one that I think is good. Solutions engineer usually is not on the core software engineering team of a product. You work with them directly, but you're working within customers that implement the product. So for example, Red Hat has a lot of solution engineering roles, Salesforce, a lot of these companies. And the reason is because their products are used by large companies like like whatever, Walmart or something like that. And they need help implementing that product. So it's still coding, and you still got to be technical. You still have to be a programmer, but you're not on the product development team. You're a customer facing role, right? And they pay really well. These roles do not pay less. Usually they require a different skill set, like customer facing ability. So you got to be charismatic. You got to be a really, really good communicator, right? And sometimes they involve travel. So you have to be flexible enough to say, hey, look, next week I'm going to Walmart. Week after that, I'm going to, some other big company, and I don't know if you want to do that, right? So, but it pays good usually. So those software engineering adjacent roles, I think are something that I would encourage people to look into. Ultimately, it's up to the student, but I would say not that far, like advocacy or writing or something like that.
Right, right. Let's see. Someone wants to know, how prepared is someone who's finished the back-end curriculum for a job, and what kind of position should they apply for if they're like, I'm ready, I want to try, like, let me put myself out there?
Yeah. So again, this is what I said earlier. Like, a huge part of the job is communication. And look, getting a job is not just like how much technical knowledge do you possess. That's part of the equation for sure. For some jobs, it's a big part of the equation. For other jobs, it's not as that big, but you do have to pass a baseline ability, obviously. All I can say is Launch School's got you covered on the technical front. We got you covered on that. You got to bring the rest. So if you apply for a role where 80%, they value 80% of the non-technical, right? They value charisma, communication. Sometimes they value locality, right? They value someone local. Sometimes they value some other thing, right? Domain knowledge. We got you covered on that 20% they're looking for on the technical front, right? But what about the other 80? I can't speak to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that question of, am I job ready? Like, depends on you. A lot of it will depend on you, and depends on a role too, right? What are they looking for? These roles are not standardized, right? They're all unique roles with unique teams. Even the same company putting out a similar job ad, the different managers on those different teams will look for different qualities, right? So it's like, can I get a job at this company after this? Got to go talk to the hiring manager, right? Got to go talk to, and that's the whole proposal here, is that we're going to package you up and give you the best training possible technically, right? And so important to get involved at Launch School, I think, for this reason, is that it's just like going to college. Like, so much of what you learn in college is not like necessarily the lecture, right? It's like people are like, oh, I could just get like MIT training on YouTube. Yes, but right, there's a whole other aspect of learning and improving oneself that's beyond the lecture. And I think same thing at Launch School. What about your public speaking? Are you choppy there? Think about what that means. If you want a remote job, I'm doing public speaking right now, right? And anytime you have a Zoom meeting, it's public speaking. So if you're choppy there, you need to develop that skill, right? If you want a remote job, and so take advantage of the resources, right? Like we have seminars where we ask groups, we put you in groups and then you do presentations, participate in the seminars, right? Get practice on those things. So take advantage of everything. It's not only if I pass an assessment, I can go work at Google. It's not as straightforward as that.
Right. You're starting to answer actually the next question that I had queued up. I want to steer us away from the jobs a little bit and get some of these other ones in. Sean wants to know, aside from applying to be a TA, how else can we gain real world experience while applying what we learn in core? How can we not leave launch school, but still get, the most out of it?
Yeah, I don't know what real world experience means. I don't think being a TA gives you real world experience. You just you're doing code reviews, right? Which is good, which is the point is this, like the training that you get at launch school, my hope is that when you go to work, it's not a big gap, right? It's not a big gap between the rigor that we ask of you at launch school, the precision that we ask of you at launch school when you go to work. It's not a huge gap, right? And so I don't think you have to be a TA. I don't think you have to do anything else. We've had just too many, results here to show that you can just do the normal thing at launch school, which already is rigorous, right? You're here, you're already at least interested in the rigorous path. What more can I do is really not, I mean, if you're interested in it, do it, right? And that's how if I see somebody interested in doing something, I won't stop them. Right. So yeah.
I think that the only thing that I might add is that from what I see students that are more successful versus least successful, the ones who interact with their peers, I think that's a big way, because you can add those soft skills, right? So technically speaking, totally, but soft skill wise, it's a huge opportunity to have all these peers who are excited to learn. You don't get that from the MIT YouTube videos. So that's what I would add in there. It's just the soft skills.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with that. I think we got you covered on the technical front. I don't think you need to do too much more unless you for sure know you have a weakness, right? But other than that, it is that working in a remote setting, we're an online school. I think there's things to be taken advantage of for that. How do you navigate an online environment? If you're here and you go, man, this is tough. I can't, it's hard for me to interact with people. So how do you think a work environment's going to be? It's the same thing, right? You don't have a buddy at work. It's like, here's your Zoom account, here's your GitHub account, a
You
laptop's
just
in the
have
mail.
emojis. I mean, that's it.
You just have emojis. Yeah, you got to learn how to emote over Zoom. You have to learn how to emote over Slack, right? You got to learn how to read the temperature in the room of a Slack channel, and you got to learn how to contribute to the culture in the Slack channel. It's the same thing. It's the same. It's the same thing. So you're in a production environment.
Great. Franco wants to know, this is interesting. For Capstone, we have that kind of like 3-month mark of people who get jobs in 3 months and people who take longer than that. What do you think is the biggest difference? Are they being choosier? Is it the skills? What's going on there?
No, that you're talking about like my little scatter graph at the 3 month or something like that. I mean, that 3 month is a random cutoff. It could be 4 months, 5 months. I mean, that's totally random. I just report the numbers that I see. I think that's one of the major discussion points that comes up among our Capstone job hunt crew, which is how do we identify patterns here that causes a longer job hunt, right? Yeah.
Not sure. Okay.
I don't know that I can prescribe anything at the moment that will say, if you address this, that's gonna there's no like we don't hold back good advice, right? Like it's in the curriculum. Like if we notice something, we're like, boom, let's add it, right? So the next Capstone cohort will see updated instructions in their in their instructions that we give them, right? Or in the lectures that we give them. They'll see it. You'll run into it. I don't have anything that like I'm withholding at the moment that we don't put in front of people, right? generically speaking, it's closer to dating than it is a standardized test. So how do you get somebody to agree to a first date, second date, and so on? How do you do that? A lot of it is just like personal charisma. I hate to say it. I wish I could just say, take this assessment. If you get a 95,
keyboard shortcuts.
yeah, wish it was a cheat sheet for you, right? It's a lot of personal charisma. It's a lot of connecting with other humans. Every single person who get a job, they'll say, wow, I got lucky. Wow, it was fortunate that we had this connection on this topic. Every single person will tell you that. But we just got to get lucky once, right? So
Interesting.
To extract patterns would be to just be like, you got to be positive. And that's easy for me to say, but it's hard to bring the energy on an interview when you keep getting rejected, right? Or when you have a bad interview just a second ago, right? You just had a previous call, terrible interview. You're bummed. It was like one of your top companies that you liked. Told your spouse about it. They're excited. And now you got rejected. You know you got bombed. Next call. How's it going? Why do you want to work for us? Like, I don't. So it's hard to be positive all the time, especially when you're getting rejected. That emotion management is a key piece of this. How do you manage your emotional state over a 3, 4, 5, 6 month job hunt, right? We're seeing job hunts extend that long now in Capstone. Even as rigorous our program is, we're seeing that, right? We never saw that before, but we're seeing that now in this market. Can you maintain positive emotional management, stable emotional management over that long of a period? Super hard. So, we spend a lot of time in Capstone working through that, right? Working with people, coaching people, talking through how to build connection with others. Like I said, we got you covered on the technical front. Like, I don't think, there's some jobs you can't qualify for, of course, right? We won't apply for those. But technically it's not usually the problem.
Right. Okay, let's see. If the market is favoring problem solvers over coders, I think we already chatted about that a bit, but how does Launch School position itself against a computer science degree?
There's no positioning against a computer science degree. I think most people know that if you have a computer science degree, it doesn't mean that you're going to be an awesome colleague, and it doesn't mean that you're going to be an awesome coder. I think people understand that, right? Experienced people understand that, at least. So if that wasn't true, we wouldn't exist. So there's not, I think there's a good thing about tech is that they will talk to you. They will, you got to prove yourself, right? They will talk to you. And then they'll give you a take home, and then they'll ask you about what you built, right? Which is where the Capstone project comes into play. So I don't see computer science grads running around with the Capstone project, frankly speaking. Right? If degree's mandatory, don't apply for that role.
Right.
Or you get filtered out, it's fine, not a big deal. I don't think your competition is computer science grads.
Okay, let's see if you have some numbers stored in your head. Someone wants to know how many students are currently enrolled in core curriculum, what percentage of them successfully complete it, and how many of those students apply to Capstone?
Yeah, about 500 people in core. We were pretty stable on that. Successful completion, I think this is where you need to define what success means for me, right? Like, a lot of people do not finish core because they get a job. Like, it's not like people finish core and then look for a job. It's like you feel pretty good. Like, someone's asking about looking for a job at the halfway point of core, right? Yeah, I've seen that plenty of times. We don't issue degrees here. So it's not like in college where, like, 1 minute you're not qualified for a job, and then the next minute when your degree is conferred, boom, I'm qualified for these jobs, right? Just because of law or something like that, right? I'm like a medical doctor, right? One minute you don't have a degree, next minute you do, you're a medical doctor. It's not like that here. Lots and lots of people leave core because they got jobs without finishing core. So I think the problem for me is what does success mean? And here's another thing I define success. You may not, but I define it this way. Someone comes to law school, checks out core for a month or two, doesn't like it, and leaves. I think that's success. To me, that's a good outcome.
They didn't spend $20,000 on a boot camp, right?
They didn't spend a lot of money. It's not financially devastating, right? They found out this wasn't a good place for them. We're not aligned. Doesn't mean they're a bad student. Doesn't mean law school is terrible. We're not aligned for whatever reason. It's totally cool. I think that's a great success. Most education institutions don't think about it that way, right? So this is why I don't look at the core curriculum percentage and try to drive that number up. I can. But in that case, if launch school is being measured on core curriculum completion percentage, I'm not going to let anybody in, right? It's going to be a super hard assessment at the end of prep. But that's not a number I care about because the monthly payment is not high enough, right? So I don't care. I care about Capstone because there's a huge obligation there, right? There's a huge obligation on all parties involved. So I really care about having a very high successful completion and job acquisition percent there.
So what about the number
it's low,
of people?
by the way, to answer your question, it's very low. If you want to look at it, it's very low just because people stop and it's good. And I'll just finish this thought. To me, the only negative outcome in core is if you're here for a long time and you don't make progress, right? This is why we have those like, if you get a bunch of not yets, I think it's 6. If you get 6 not yets, we have the right to ask you to leave. Not ask you to leave, we have the right to kick you out. But we won't just do that like randomly. We'll talk to you like, hey, you got 3 not yets. What's up? Something's not working, right? You've been here for long. You're spending a lot of money here. We're not giving you the right advice, or you're not taking action on advice. Either one of those things is not a good fit. Like, I don't want you here for a long time and not making progress. It's not what we're here for. So I think that's the only negative outcome that can happen in core. And I try really hard to guard against that.
Right. And what about, I think the last part of that was how many students apply for Capstone and how many are selected?
Okay, so this is the easy question to answer as well, because I think nobody finishes core unless they're applying for Capstone. There's no reason to do that. I see so many people just stop like at the last couple courses, right? Or they don't want to do the last assessment, right? If they're not doing Capstone. So the only reason why they finish core is usually to do Capstone. And so the number of people who apply to Capstone who finish core is very high. It's like 95+%, right? It's rare to see somebody who actually finishes core but doesn't have plans for Capstone. They'll stop before the completion of core. And then of the people who apply, we admit most people. Again, 95+%. We admit just because they've proven themselves. And again, usually if you get a bunch of not yets, or if you are not doing well, you've stopped before then. So right. The admissions rate is pretty high.
Mm-hmm. Core is the big filter, right? The big early filter that happens.
Exactly. You gotta like us, we gotta like you, and just monthly pay, right? As we go, as we feel each other out. Mm-hmm. So by the time you finish core, we understand you and you understand us.
Nice. So there are 2 fairly new courses in the curriculum. I think we just got the TypeScript one and the Intro to Algorithms. And I want to know, how do you decide what content to add to the core curriculum? What is that based on?
Good question. It's based on the market. Everything is based on what we see. Capstone grads' experiences during interviews, after interviews, at work. We talk to them all the time. See a lot of people using TypeScript. We added in Capstone, and Capstone is just too full of content. Right? We don't know where to put stuff. So then we're like, all right, got to start putting stuff in core. right? Because just bursting at the seams in terms of content that we want to cover. We're out of room. We don't want to add it to like 5 months, 6 months, right? So we add courses in core curriculum. So it's backfilled, if that makes sense, right? So when we first started Launch School, I mean, it was like, we think this is the bar, right? We think. Take a good shot. I mean, I already had a decade of experience, and at that point, I already taught like 3 years, right? With the previous teaching company that I had, Tea Leaf Academy, right? So it was a good take. I think it was a good shot at the bar. But now, we're like 7, 8 years into this thing. It's market driven, backfilled, right? And we continuously modify courses based on that. We used to have a pretty rigorous HTML CSS assessment. People would spend like a month preparing for it and trying to pass the HTML CSS assessment. Guess how many HTML CSS questions we see for Capstone grads? 0, like none. And when we removed that assessment, people were like kind of mad at us. They're like, look, you can't like you're looking down on like front end. I'm like, I'm not looking down on anything. I think it's really important. I value people who have this ability. We just don't see it on our job hunt. That's it. That's all I'm saying. Right? We decreased our severity of our SQL coverage. That course was probably twice as deep as it is now. We lightened it by 50%. Why? We rewrote the whole book, right? Like removed a ton of stuff. Why? We weren't getting grilled in that way. Our grads were not getting grilled in that way. So we lightened it. Increased coverage of networking by about 50% or by 100%, right? Double the depth of the networking content. Same reason, right? So this whole thing is backfilled all the way to prep. This whole thing's backfilled.
Cool. Yeah, so the curriculum, I think, is a lot more dynamic than a lot of the students feel, because we get here and it looks like this thing that's been laid out for ages, but it's actually changing all the time.
All the time, constantly. It's a live document, right? Got an email from somebody just like, hey, I want to make sure it doesn't change. I'm like, it's going to change. You're going to get upset later if you have that mindset.
Right.
Do you see these courses with a D after it all the time? Those are deprecated courses, right? It's like, I'm going to wait until none of them are deprecated. It's a continuous thing. It's a live document, right? So don't wait.
All right, here's one on a bit of a different subject. Someone thinks that they heard you mention in a podcast that you wanted to get a bit more involved in like the less advantaged or lower income communities. Do you have any ideas on what that would look like?
Tried really hard last year. So I taught an AP computer science course for a high school that is like 90% lower income. Just on my own, right? Like didn't charge them any money. Actually jumped through all the hoops. I'm like a legal high school teacher in Arizona. So, having gone through that experience and been doing a bunch of other stuff, I did like Code in Place, which is that Stanford organized free coding lesson. I was a section lead for my section for Code in Place. Got a lot of inspiration from that, which is how we started our Smooth Start program, right? So a lot of doing a lot of things last year that was trying to tackle this. And I feel like we have to, if we want to do that, it needs to be, it probably needs to be like a nonprofit thing. I don't see a path where I'm a big believer in like, you can make money and do good. But at least for now, I don't see the intersection of those two things. Like one of the things about the high school thing was I wanted to see if I can find, like we have some really smart high school students who come and, do launch school, and then now they're making a ton of money. See if we can do that for low income families. What would it be when the household income is 40,000 and you have an 18-year-old, 19-year-old who can make 120? Wow, that changes not just that individual, but that family. And if you have 2 students like that in that one community, now you're changing communities, right? That's the thought. Just found it really hard to prescribe launch school to that group. Really, really good. You should go to Stanford, right? You're applying to Stanford and Berkeley. Yeah, you should do that. You should not do launch school, right? That will set you up better, I think. If so it, yeah, the desire is still there. The exact solution, I want to make sure we're not doing harm. I think it's easy to go into a low income community and be like, hey, do launch school, send your high school kids here. What if half of them don't get a job? I guess they can go to college still, but you've cost them a year, right? So just found it hard to go down that road and give a strong pitch like that. Happy to do it as a charity, continue teaching AP computer science courses for free. Happy to do that, I think. But it was very tiring, so I needed a break. Mm-hmm. They asked me to do another one. I'm like, it was a lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have some questions about age. I think we have a few of them in here. Someone wants to know if you think it makes a difference when people are applying for jobs, if they are judged based on their age at all. And another person is saying, am I too old? I'm 43, though they've been a SQL developer for 20 years. So I think I know the answer, but I'll let you answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think discrimination exists. Age discrimination exists. Gender discrimination exists, right? Race discrimination exists. But again, the good thing about tech is that there's enough opportunities where a few gatekeepers can't keep you down. So 40 is not, I don't think 40 is old enough to experience age discrimination. Like if you're like in your 60s or something, right? And you're applying for a job where they're all like 23. That's not a big deal. I've seen that. Where the big deal comes in is like they like these 23-year-olds might want to like work 24 hours a day, right? Or 12 hours a day. So I've seen that in the Bay Area, right? I've been on job interviews when I worked in the Bay Area, job interviews in person. They're like, we cater 3 meals a day. I'm like, I don't want that. I don't want to eat 3 meals with you. Maybe one at most, right? 1 meal with you at most, right? At the time, I was engaged and I was like, well, I'm gonna deal with my fiance. She's like, I'll bring her. I'm like, no. I'm not gonna be engaged anymore. I'm gonna lose my engagement here. So like tech has a lot of runs the gamut in terms of culture, right? You do have that culture in especially small startups. Not always. I don't want to put that in your head where you're like, oh, small startups where they work 12 hours a day. That's not true. I'm just giving an example here, right? Where you might run into that situation where it's more like lifestyle difference, right? Cultural difference, I think. And that manifests in a large age gap. So, generational differences, right, come into play as well. Even I find myself just not being able to keep up with like the lingo nowadays, right? There's words that I don't know what they mean. And I'm just like, whoa, that's certified means you're old. So, it's just like a cultural difference, I think. But again, this is why people want to transition to tech, right? There's so many opportunities. I wouldn't let that deter you. I do think in tech, though, it trends young. I think it's changing a lot due to just, non-traditional, we still call them non-traditional, but frankly, there's so many now. I think it's traditional, but like non-CS grads, right? Like if you only think CS grads come in, then it's just like a influx of young people all the time, right? But if you go to like the Bay Area, the shocking thing about the Bay Area is nobody's over 35 there, right? It's just like everyone's young. It's crazy. I don't know why, but that's the way it is. So if you're like over 50 or something like that, you have to deal with that, right? So, but I would say it's not something that you can't overcome, right? I remember I managed somebody that was very old. I shouldn't say very old, but at the time it seemed old, but now it's probably not, right? I was probably my late 20s, I want to say, as a manager, early 30s, late 20s. It's all blur. And this person was a good 25 years older than me and had that much more experience than me, and I was the manager, right? It's weird. It's a weird dynamic. It was weird for me, and weird for him too. So can you overcome that, right? So I think just be generous, be positive, right? Try to adapt yourself, right? And I think it'll be fine.
Awesome. Capstone. Everyone wants to know, what is the day-to-day for a capstone student? During core in particular, everyone works at their own pace. Does this change during capstone?
Yes, for sure. Capstone has a very rigid schedule, day to day to day. It is your traditional education experience where we have a conveyor belt that's just going, right? And if you're like, I don't know, it's 100%, there's no solution to that. We have another thing coming up tomorrow, right? So the good thing is the topics we cover in Capstone do not require mastery. We're doing just-in-time learning. And there's just different phases of Capstone. I want to say there's like 4 or 5 distinct phases of Capstone where your day-to-day is actually very different, right? So the first two phases with like data structure algorithms and system design, it has a similar cadence where you have like a lecture in the morning, you have exercises, labs, and then you have group work in the afternoon, and then you're done for the day, but then you have homework, right? So you have to set aside at least a couple hours to do the homework and do some exercises, right? And then the next day, we review the exercises and the group work that you did. We review it, then we introduce a new topic, and you repeat. So that has a very familiar cadence. I think it's probably very similar to most math courses you've taken in high school or college. And then we move on to different phases. We'll have yet a different experience, right? The next phase after that is more in the morning sessions. We cover like full stack development, APIs, modern web development techniques, SSR versus CSR. And then in the afternoon session, it's like project ideation, which is more open-ended research, right? So in the morning is very structured. There's specific things you have to do. We actually give you like a project and you like fill. It's almost like fill it in. Not quite that basic. You still got to code and understand. But we give you a structure, and you can't do it. We'll give you the code. We'll give you the solution, right? So you can continue on tomorrow. So if you're like, oh, I have time, I can figure it out. It's okay. Boom, here you go. The next day you can follow along. The afternoon session is more open. It's a little bit more unstructured, research oriented. So that's that second phase, or that's the third phase. And then after that, we have, project building, where we give you a Capstone mentor, and you're in building phase, right? Research and building. And then after that, you have to do the write-up. I mean, it just keeps going, right? And you got to try to hang on, do your best to hang on. This is why we need core grads. I get a lot of emails like, hey, I've been a software engineer for 5 years, want to do Capstone. I just want to skip all that. Can I just test in a Capstone? I'm like, that's core. No, but I just want to take a test. I'm like, that's what assessments are. But I want to take one test. Can you just talk to me on the phone? I'm like, no, just take the assessments, right? Of course they never do, but we need people to come in with a certain level of ability, right? That's just, otherwise we can't guarantee success, right? We can't guarantee success in that environment. It's very unforgiving, but it's a lot of fun. If you can hang in that environment, it's a lot of fun. And that's what work is. People they overestimate and underestimate, right? Like you knock on somebody who can have $100,000, they're not going to say no. But yeah, sure. Can you do this? And then when you get that job, they're going to just give you work, right? You got now you're on a conveyor belt of work. You got to deliver work, right? That's not when you want to be learning fundamentals. Learning on the job for fundamentals is the most stressful experience, because you're like, crap, I don't even have the fundamental skills to do this job, let alone do the just-in-time learning to bridge the gap. There is no gap. I don't have fundamentals. It's all gap, right? So you don't want to be in that situation, even if you do land a job. You want to land a job where you can feel there's a little bit of a gap, you can plug that gap, and then you're set up for success, right? So have to do well in core to do well in Capstone. And doing well in Capstone is evidence that you can do well in a job too.
Great. That was a great breakdown. Thank you. Speaking of that kind of last phase, the job hunt, I think a lot of people are curious, like these numbers are crazy. And we talked about that earlier. We have a really big filter set on it. So the people who are actually making it to Capstone applications are getting in. But someone wants to know, do the Capstone students get to decide which companies or jobs they apply for, or are they kind of tied to the employers that Launch School chooses for them?
Oh no, we don't choose anything for them. No, yeah, you of course. Yeah. I mean, we're not going to force anybody to work at a company you don't work at. That's insane, right? We wouldn't do that. I almost feel like anytime you have a question like this, like whatever you think is the reasonable answer is probably what we would do. Because the other one sounds crazy. I don't know. Like I have to work at this company, but I want to work at that company.
Yeah. Do Capstone cohorts have to eat 3 meals a day together?
Yeah, no. Some teams
Okay.
really like each other, other teams not so much.
So then I guess a more reasonable question is, what qualities do you recommend that grads, whether it's core or capstone or not even core, look for in a company to work for?
Yeah. So, I know everyone looks at the salaries, which is good. I'm happy to share that and to see the high salaries as well. I can just tell you, I've never designed Launch School with any salary number in mind. It was always about what you know, and I assume that will set you up for success, as for whatever, right? The number one thing I think is that you are set up for success. It's not the salary. But as I said in other places, salary correlates with good companies. Like a lot of people will say, I'm willing to, 120, that's already super high. I'm willing to work for like 80, 70. It doesn't matter that much. As long as I'm set up for success, I am, being mentored, given work that I can do, put on a path for growth, because I know that I can make more money later. Well, those types of jobs are high paying, right? That's rarely a trade-off. Like lower paying jobs are bad across the board, right? You don't have mentorship. There are no, it's almost like I'm the only low paying person. Like I want everyone else to be like high paid senior engineers, right? That's not how that works usually. Usually if you're get into that environment, you're also high paid, right? And they will mentor you, right? And they'll set you up for success. It's funny how that works. Like when I talk to Capstone grads, it's not like the people who make more work more or have a harder time or anything like that. It's like a lot of times like people who make more have everything's better. Like work-life balance is better, the culture is better, It's like they work less than some people who make less money, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah,
So
they're a bigger investment, right?
yeah, so for me, it's always about the people and the culture, and it's got to match what you're looking for. And a lot of times it's like you have to know that about yourself. If you don't, then that's when it's confusing, right? So it's almost like over time, this is why, again, coming from a different career can be an advantage in that you know what you're looking for, right? Sometimes people who are straight out of college have a disadvantage in that they haven't experienced any work environment. So it's like, I don't know what I'm looking for. It's just salary, just money. Like the more money, the better, right? That's the only requirement. Okay, that's fine too, right? We'll try that, right? But people, right? Good people, great culture for growth, for learning, right? Engineering centric culture, not always, frantic and chaotic, right?
Right. Okay, so this is interesting. Nicole noticed that the cohort size grew larger since 2021. Why is this? Is it the acceptance rate is higher? Are there more applicants or a mix of both? What's going on with those numbers?
I think it's just more people in core. Acceptance rate has been the same. It's not ever dipped below 90%, I don't think, or 95%. It's always been very, very high. As I said before, I don't think people finish core unless they're applying to Capstone. I just don't see people finishing core. Like the number of people in our core alumni channel that have finished core it's low. You know, and that's why I don't know who's finished core. They're like, hey, I'm canceled. I'm like, great. And then they'll say, I got a job, thanks for everything, in the cancellation message. That's how I know they've finished core. Right? I'm like, oh, okay, you got a job, great. You want to be in the core alumni channel even though they didn't finish core, right? That's how that happens. So I think the number of people in Capstone is a reflection of the number of people in core, because it's kind of like a funnel. And over the years, we've just had a very slow burn, but a consistent growth in core. And because of the recent downturn, actually, we stopped that growth. It's just kind of like the same now, right?
Mhm.
But even when it grew, it was very slow. I don't know how many of you have been here for years and years, but there was a time when we had like 200-300 people in core.
Mhm.
And so you're going to have less capstone students, right?
Cool. I get this question sometimes. Do you think that launch school students should be worrying about networking with other engineers at this stage, or not yet?
What stage are you at?
In
Look,
core.
you'll hear a lot of different advice about this. So my advice is you need to make a good impression. I'll give an anecdotal advice here, or example here. Had a capstone a capstone participant in core go to a local meetup. This is when prior to COVID, in-person meetups. Went in there, introduced himself as learning to code, because he was learning to code. He's doing launch school, pretty excited about master-based learning, right? You're like, okay, great, learning code, that's awesome. Welcome to our meetup. A year later, he finished Capstone, went to the same meetup, would say, hey, I finished that program. Remember that program I was in? I finished it. And he went a couple more times, right? But not like every month, but a couple more times. So people know of him. This is 1 full year later. It's like, yeah, I finished that program. I'm done. I actually went through their, capstone, that's even more advanced. And now I'm ready for my job. Guess what type of jobs people were referring him? Yeah, he's new. Because these folks had like 10 plus years experience, right? 20 years experience. Like, whatever, no matter how many months of learning you did or how much ramp up you experienced, you're new. It's like, oh, here's this internship, pays $10 an hour. Are you interested in that? Like, well, the program I went to, their average is like 120. It's like, whoa, young one, 120, that's not for you. You got to start low. You got to start the way I started. Pay your dues, that type of thing, right? So you don't want to get pigeonholed. Once you're pigeonholed, people know you as that. And especially if you're at a program like Launch School, I think transformation happens much faster than people expect. If you're doing core and you're doing capstone, the transformation you experience, I think, will be far more, dramatic than what other people will think of when they're not in this program. So I think you go out there and hit them hard from the outset, show your best hand, right? Which hopefully is your capstone project.
Right. When do you think that students should start thinking about capstone?
We have a note about the halfway point of core that has a lot of details about this. So usually at that point, not too early and not too late. Too early, so it's always hard for me because I got dinged on this in the past, because we used to write everything on the capstone page, like all the details of everything. And then people will start core, and then like 2-3 years later would be like, hey, I thought capstone was like this. I'm like, yeah, but that's like 3 years ago. Like, it's like we changed it. It's not like that anymore. It's this now. And especially the price. So now we've been at 18% or $18,000, whichever one is higher. We've been at that for a while. But when we first did Capstone, it changed a lot, because we were just like, oh, this is very expensive to operate. Like, it's not sustainable, right? So we started at 10%. And it was just like not, Capstone was just like a complete red. It's just like, if just maybe I'm paying myself too much, I don't know, but like we're just like, we got to stop this, right? Or increase the price. So, and then we went to like 15%, and then we went to 18%, right? So that's where and also just the format. The more details you show earlier and we make a change, the more people are like, man, I've been doing this for like 2-3 years thinking that was like that, and it's not like that anymore. So I want to avoid those conversations, and that's why I want to just talk to you about Capstone not too early. If you're like 3 years away from Capstone, I don't want to talk to you about it. Right? I don't want to tell you the details because those could change. I don't want to say, oh, we covered, these 4 pieces of technology. I mean, 3 years from now, I don't know. Right. So at the halfway point, you're making good progress. You're roughly, whatever, 4 months away, 3-4 months away. And so we want to talk to you at that point. Not too late either, because we got to start building the cohort. Like right now, we're kind of putting together the January cohort. Right now, this is we're in October, barely, not even October yet, right? But when it comes to October, we're gonna start getting on people like, hey, got to make your decision, because we're making emission decisions in November, right? So October is like you're gonna do it or not, because we're gonna put this thing together. So it can't be too late. Like if you come at us in mid-November and be like, hey, I'm ready to go for January, it's too late. We're done. We already made our cohort. Right. So but we do have a note for you. So if you go through core like normally, there's going to be a note for you.
Right. So if you haven't seen it yet, don't worry. You'll get a little note there, and I think it links to a video and stuff. So there's lots of information.
People want details,
there.
but again, you things change in 3 years.
Someone wants to know, have many people joined as level 3 or level 4 software engineers after finishing core or Capstone, or do most join as L1?
These are company specific titles, ranges. These don't mean anything. So we've had people join companies for pretty high titles. We've had people join with like, I'll give you an example. One person applied for a job at Datadog, junior software engineer. Datadog is a public company, very, very, very engineering centric. And I'm like, yeah, we don't want to apply for junior jobs. He goes, it just pays 125. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Go for it. Doesn't matter, right? It's about growth, people, salary. I said salary was important. Title was even less important.
Right.
So, yeah, we've had people join at every level you can think of. Maybe not like CTO or whatever, but for smaller companies, it's just like, yeah, whatever title you want.
A level 1 at like the big public company might be like the dream job of someone who's at a level 2 at a different company. It's just
and here's relative. The thing. I want to really emphasize this point. You're not tricking anybody. All right. People hire you despite knowing your background. You're not like, we're not dressing up a pig, putting lipstick on a pig. We're saying, this is what we know. This is what I'm capable of. This is the program I went through to do that. You can talk about launch school if you want. This is an option for you. I have not noticed a difference. If you don't want to talk about launch school, it's totally fine. It's your call. If you want to talk about it, it's your call too, right? But you're showcasing your ability, and whatever title you get, right? We're more interested in like how much, like make sure you're getting paid fairly. But usually, for example, maybe this is a better answer, is usually for Capstone grads, we tell people not to apply for principal or staff or higher. Obviously not executive roles, right? Principal, staff, out of range for us. Senior, whatever, sure, apply. Not a big deal, right? But here's the thing, even though you have the title senior software engineer, they know you're not senior. Like, people understand that. You're not tricking anyone. They will give you senior knowing you're not a senior. You're all new, right? I have 20 years of experience. What am I? Like a dinosaur? I am, but no one's senior coming out of Capstone despite the title. They know that. It's okay.
Great. Let's see. We've filtered through most of the questions. I know a lot of you asked questions that were a bit more specific, and I'm just going to direct those to the email, because, you know, if they're super specific to you, we can give you like that personal answer. I'll ask one more and then see where we're at. What do you see when you see successful Capstone grads going and getting jobs? When you think back to how they were in core, are there any commonalities? Like, what are our successful Capstone grads doing when they're in core?
Yeah, it's first of all, you don't have to do these things. And also you have to define what success means for you. There are Capstone graduates now who I barely even talk to and know, right? And they are successful. They are great jobs, make a lot of money, and that's okay. But based on my impression, my interactions, the people who get to know the people around them, make a positive contribution to the people, to the environment around them. You know, when you go to work, one of the major qualities that your manager and your employer will look for is, do you make things better just by being around that thing? Right? Do you just perform the task, or do you actually just make that whole thing better? You have ideas around like improving things, right? And this is any job. You can work at a fast food restaurant and be in charge of the, you know, the fryer and have that attitude. Or I'm just going to like deliver whatever I'm told and that's it, right? And it's one thing to say, well, I'll do that when I'm paid. I'm not getting paid at launch school. Why bother? Right? That's fine, maybe. But what I've seen is people who do that at launch school, it's so easy for them to do that at work. So when I follow people at work, especially our TAs, right? When I follow our TAs at work, how's they doing? Of course they're doing great. And they're not only doing great because they have technical knowledge, right? That's only a part of it. They're doing great because they show great initiative. They're great communicators. They're very empathetic. These are all attributes that they demonstrate at launch school in order for us to select them as a TA, right? So try to develop those attributes in a relatively safer environment like launch school. So if you know that you're not naturally like looking to help others, maybe try it. When you get paid and you have that built in, you're going to be a standout employee, right? Versus I'll turn that dial on when I'm getting paid. Maybe that's rare, I think.
Right.
So use the environment here, you know, use this. It's like helping others might sound like a cop out, like, well, that's not my job, Chris. That's what launch school is here for. That's your job. Right? I get it. We do that. But I actually think you learn a lot when you try to teach others. I'll throw this out there too. When I start like teaching people was never in my career plan, by the way, totally random, coincidental, and I love it now. But I learned more in that first couple of years of teaching people than I did in like the previous 10 years. Just because people ask questions, and especially good students will like probe and always probe your edges that you wouldn't probe on your own necessarily. You're like, yeah, that's a good question. Let me, you know, investigate. Let me try to figure that out. And my knowledge base just grew tremendously, you know, over those first couple of years. And so when you teach others, especially when we have the student body that we do at launch school, right? You're going to get pushed. You're going to get pushed into little weird corners of knowledge that you may not be investigating on your own. You don't want to go down rabbit holes, which is why we have a curriculum, right? But if it's even within the bounds of our curriculum, there are edges that you may not explore on your own. So when you try to teach others and answer questions, you get pushed, right? Like you do code reviews, you'll see, like Brandy, you do code reviews, right? So like, isn't that a crazy experience to do code reviews?
It is, yeah.
So
yeah.
Reading code is a different skill set than writing code. And when you read lots of different people's code, all of a sudden you just develop that fluency with it, right? So, you know, you're not assigned a task, but take advantage of the community student body here, work with each other. Again, at the end of the day, ultimately, this is a human job. It's a human activity, right? You're going to work with humans. That's why you're going to get paid.
Right. Yeah, I think one of my favorite things about the community here, and what I tell people all the time, is that no one here is too cool for school. And I love that because like in our traditional education, I hated that, and here no one is too cool for school. So take advantage of that. It's awesome to meet up with your peers and everyone is so into learning.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Hey, great conversation, great questions. And feel free to follow up over email. I check that. I check. Everyone's like surprised I answer email. We don't get that many. It's just a couple a day usually. So feel free to follow up.
Yeah, if I didn't choose your question today, just shoot us an email. Some of them are pretty specific, so or if any more come up, feel free. I'll drop that email in the chat to everyone. And then we also have a bit of a feedback form. Let me finish this first. So here's the email. It's going to get lost in the thank yous, but scroll on up and find it. And we also have a bit of a feedback form for today. Just if you liked the questions we talked about, if you feel like we ignored, like I wanted more capstone, I wanted more this or that, we do these for you guys. So let us know, because we're not here for us, we're here for you guys. And we want to talk about what you guys want to hear about. So fill out that form and let us know, and we'll, respond to it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Brandy. That was awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.